Hello, in this video we are going to do some basic troubleshooting on the Ingersoll SC71 and 73 night latch. We often get inquiries where the owner of the lock is not sure whether or not the lock case, and that's this piece, the lock case, is at fault, or whether it's the cylinder on the other side. So in this video we're going to show you how to test both of those. So the first thing we're going to look at is removing the lock case from the door so that we can test the cylinder and the lock case independently. So in order to carry out this process, you're going to need some basic tools. You're going to need a pair of pliers. You're going to need a medium-sized flat screwdriver and a small-size flat screwdriver. I think that's about 3.5 millimeters there. And you might need a Posi-Drive number 2 screwdriver. It depends on what screws were shipped with the lock at the time. So now we're going to open the little door, so open the lock, and we're going to remove the 3 wood screws that are holding the lock case to the door. So we've removed those screws, and here they are. And these are the screws that I was referring to that might be flathead or might be a Posi-Drive number 2. Also important to note is that the later locks have got 3 wood screw holes here, and the earlier locks have only got 2. They'll just have one here and one there. Apart from that third hole, that's the only material difference in the lock cases. The lock is still fixed to the door with these 2 screws that people often miss. There's one here and there's one there. And they're quite long screws that go all the way through the lock case to the end here. We're going to unscrew one and show you. Okay, so we're now going to undo the top of those 2 screws, and that's where we use the smaller of the flat screwdrivers, and it only takes a few turns before the thread is disengaged, and you'll see now, no matter how many times we turn, that's not coming out any further. And this is where the pliers are going to be used, but before we do, the screw isn't quite protruding far enough to grab hold of it with the pliers. Sometimes it will be out further than that, but in this case, we're going to use that screwdriver that we used to just persuade the head of the screw a little bit further out so that we can now grip it with the pliers. And as you'll see, we'll just gently, and it shouldn't be any resistance, pull that screw out. And now you can see what I mean, that it's a long screw with a small thread at one end and your slot at the far end there. So we've loosened off the bottom screw now, and the thing to watch out for now is when you take that screw out is that the lock case itself may be stuck to the door with paint or varnish or something, or it might be loose like this one, and it could actually fall at this point. This one is fitted well, so it's quite tight, so removing it is necessary. It won't drop. Now we've got the lock case removed, and we're going to move on to troubleshooting the cylinder. And the cylinder can be troubleshooted without removing it from the door. So if the cylinder's on the door here as it is, it's fixed to the back plate, the mounting plate, and we can now try the keys. We're going to insert the key into the cylinder. The hole for the key ring should always be facing down before you put the key in. That's the correct orientation. And now turning the key correspondingly rotates that connecting bar that engages on the inside of the lock case in here. And if you can turn the key freely, left and right, with no difficulty, you have now eliminated your cylinder as the source of the problem. If, on the other hand, you're having trouble turning the key at this point, or it feels very stiff and won't rotate freely, you know that the cylinder is faulty. Removing the key without the lock engaged, it can be tricky, but you're looking for that little notch when it gets to the 12 to 6 o'clock position. We'll just do that again, and we come back, and there's the notch, and then the key can be withdrawn. Okay, so now we're going to troubleshoot the lock case. So the first thing we're going to do is test the bolt action, and we're going to hold it in our hand and depress the detector in and out several times, and we're looking for the bolt to come out correspondingly each and every time. We normally do about 10 of these operations, and if the bolt only comes out halfway or something along those lines, or a third of the way on one of those operations, it might be suspect. But this is a new lock and it's completely fine. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to depress the detector to simulate the door being locked, and then we're going to operate the handle to make sure that the bolt withdraws itself each and every time that we pull the handle back. And as you can see, this one is doing exactly as it should. So the next thing we're going to test is the operation of the lock from the other side, which we simulate the presence of this connecting bar here that comes from the cylinder. And as I mentioned earlier, engages in this cam follower on the inside of the lock. And we're going to use our larger flat screwdriver to do that. This being an SC71, it has two functions, so we're going to show you both. So the first one is we're going to simulate the door locking by depressing the detector, and now we're going to simulate unlocking the door with the key in the cylinder using our screwdriver. And you'll see if we turn in that direction, it withdraws the bolt each and every time. So this being the SC71 model, I did mention it's got two functions. So the other function is double locking, and you double lock it by rotating it in the opposite direction to opening the lock. One full revolution, and remember you'll be doing that with your key. We're simulating it with the screwdriver here. And then once you've done that, the bolt will protrude and the lock is now double locked. And the idea of that is that the handle cannot be pulled open in order to withdraw the bolt. So somebody can't smash a window, let's say, and reach round and open the lock that way if it's been double locked. The other feature on the SC71 and the SC73, because we'll talk about that in a second, they do look identical to each other, is the latch function. So you can put the lock on the latch, if you like, so that you won't get locked out if you just pop out to the front garden or something like that. And this is the device here that turns the latch on or off. And we'll just demonstrate that to you now. So if you were troubleshooting the lock and it was in the latch position and you now depress that bolt, nothing happens. It won't lock, essentially. And that is often the problem. People call us and say the lock won't lock, and it's just because that's been activated. So depending on whether it's on the left-hand side of the door or the right-hand side of the door, that'll always be either in the up position like that or in the down position, depends on the handing of your door. So if your lock case won't behave in the way that we've just described, or is stiff or is difficult to use, then you know your problem is your lock case. Although it's not impossible, because some of these locks have been on doors for 60 or 70 years now. It could potentially be both that need replacing, or it could be the alignment between the lock and the striking plate. And I'll link to the video about alignment now. So I mentioned earlier on the two versions. So this particular lock, the whole lock is called an SC71, and this is the version that has that double locking facility. So the lock case itself is just called the RA71, available as a spare part on our website, as is the cylinder. If this lock was an SC73, then the lock case would be called an RA73, and that double locking feature that we showed you by rotating the key the other way, that doesn't work. It doesn't double lock. All that will happen by doing the screwdriver test is you'll either unlock the lock in one direction or it won't turn in the other. But the double locking function rather, doesn't exist. They're suitable for apartments and fire exits, things like that. So what we're going to do now is put this lock case back on this door, because we know it isn't faulty. The first thing to do, remove the key. Make sure you've removed the key, because that can confuse things. And then the next thing we need to do, because this is the SC71 lock and the RA71 lock case, is we need to put it in the double locked position before we fit it back on the door. And we're just going to show you that now. So we just take the screwdriver, turn it to the position where the bolt is out, and we'll be now ready to fit it back on the door. If this had been an RA73, a non-double locking version, you wouldn't have had to have done that last operation. You just put it back on the door with the bolt withdrawn into the lock case. So putting the lock case back onto the door can be a tiny bit fiddly, and it's only because the connecting bar dangles down a bit, and that will need just to be lifted up. I mean, not like this without the lock case there. We're going to show you this operation, but you can't see that bit, and while we've got the lock case going on, we're going to show you that. So now we're going to do it for real, and we're going to put the lock case back on the door, and my colleague's got the screwdriver. He's just going to persuade the connecting bar into the cam follower, which can be tricky even for experienced locksmiths. But there you are, he's got it. He's done it lots of times. And now the lock case is on the door. So now, while holding the lock case with his thumb into the door, we're going to insert the two long screws. What that's going to do is allow you to free up one hand because the lock case is now firmly on the door. Now we're just going to do those 2 screws up. Sometimes you need to give a little bit of a push on the back of the screwdriver because sometimes the tip of that screw, the thread won't engage without that little bit of a push on the back of the screwdriver. I think we missed that. We'll just do that one more time just to make that. You don't always have to do it. If you start turning the screw and it's going in, then you've got it. It's fine. We're going to pop the 3 wood screws back in. So they're in there now. So we've got the door open, but the lock is double locked. So we now need to put the key into the cylinder, and we're going to undouble lock it. And once we've undouble locked it, the lock is now reset and ready for use. And we'll just shut the door and show you. And there you are.